Inmate B50967 woke up the same way he did most days, to the sound of jingling tags. He had dreamed about his first kill. Not the ones he had written about in that stupid journal, but the very first kill he'd ever made. Before he had been inmate B50967, before he had been Officer Cribbs, even before he had been Christopher Cribbs, star running back for the Kashmir High Wendigos, he had been Chris Cribbs, an overweight 12-year-old with a crush. His crush, Maggie Thornton, had been beautiful. She was a grade ahead of him, with long red hair, freckles, and skin the color of cream. She, however, was popular, and Chris was just a fat little boy who collected Pokemon cards and smelled like milk. That hadn't stopped him from asking her out, right there at lunch where everyone could see. And when she had laughed at him, they had all laughed at him. That had kindled a fire in him, something hot and hateful, and when she caught him following her home, she showed no fear of this four-eyed little squirt. "I told you, Crisco, I don't want to go out with you. Why don't you go home and eat some..." But her words fell off when he shoved her sideways, sending her sprawling down the hill that fell off into the woods. She had screamed as she fell, but not for very long. He had found her near the base. Her head had hit a big rock down there, and instead of taking her to the hospital or making up a story for the police, Chris had dragged her to an old, falling-apart cabin he knew of that was not far from the school. He ran there often, especially when the bigger kids picked on him, and it was as good as a second home to him. He hid her there, amidst the trees and the splintery boards, and for a while, Chris played house. He liked this time. She was his ever-present, ever-doting wife, and he was the hard-working man just waiting to come home. He fed her, talked to her, he fulfilled many of the desires he had long repressed, and she lived for another week. She didn't move, she didn't talk, but he could see her eyes moving when he came back to bring her food and things, and that was fine. He came twice a day, before and after school, and her eyes were always hopeful, always pleading, as he tricked himself into thinking that she was happy to see him. She was his first everything, and they experienced so much in that week. It was not, however, meant to last. He came home one afternoon, her eyes sluggishly flicking to him, and suddenly he was filled with need. He had thought about her beautiful face all day at school, and suddenly he wanted nothing so much as to have her again. She was filthy. He hadn't bathed her or changed her in a week, but he hardly cared. She was all his, and that was enough for him. He moved closer, intending to kiss her before they moved on to other things, but her eyes stopped him dead in his tracks. What he had seen had filled him with a rage hotter than the embers he'd felt before, and a deep and profound sadness. As she lay there, her eyes boring into him, he had seen her hate, her disgust, and her wish for his death in her perfect green eyes. How could she feel like this? He had saved her, taken care of her, and this was how she repaid him. Oh, sure, she could flirt with Kevin Jacobs or Kendrick Hedges. She could tease any member of the football team or any of the baseball boys, but she couldn't summon up the time of day for Chris Cribbs. Suddenly he felt his rage matching hers. Well, if that was how it was, then he decided that she could just try her luck without him. She was beginning to stink anyway, and he left that day and never came back. He thought about it a few times, but he made himself stay away. She didn't deserve him. She was nothing but a whore. That's what his father called them, and he had just realized it. Maybe she died there, maybe she didn't, but to his knowledge, they never found her body, and she remained a missing person to this day. Sometimes he wondered if her bones still sat in that house, the only resident of a dilapidated ruin. It was probably just rotten wood and pine needles by now anyway. Something pawed at his face, the jingling getting louder, and inmate B50967 opened his eyes to see the old orange tomcat standing on his chest. "Good morning, Hermes," he growled, scratching the cat behind its remaining ear, like it liked, as he reached beneath the collar for his next list of orders. The first note he'd received, the one that had told him about Peter Remy, had told him the cat's name, though most inmates just called him Old One Ear. Hermes seemed a fitting name for something that served a god of death, ushering souls to the underworld through these little slips of paper. Whether that made him Charon or just another Cerberus, inmate B50967 didn't know, but what he did know was that whatever name was on that paper would get him one step closer to his freedom. He unrolled it, stared at the name, memorized it, before flushing it down the toilet. Mackenzie Daniels, E2, 14 low, blonde man, beard, 5'7", Jesse tattoo on his upper arm. Jesse tattoo on upper arm. That had been a common theme lately. B50967 wondered why, but he guessed it didn't really matter. They had a long sentence, and the warden needed them dead. That was all that really mattered. He'd kill this one, and another one, and another, and go right on killing till he had his 12. That was the deal, and that was what he wanted to do. Mackenzie Daniels, E2, 14 low, blonde man, beard, 5'7", Jesse tattoo on upper arm. He crumpled the note into a ball, working it between his hands as he did. Mackenzie Daniels, E2, 14 low, blonde man, beard, 5'7", Jesse tattoo on upper arm. He tossed it into the toilet, repeating the information like a mantra. Mackenzie Daniels, E2, 14 low, blonde hair, beard, 5'7", Jesse tattoo on upper arm. He flushed the toilet as the lights came on overhead, signaling another day in prison. B50967 dressed, strapping his knife on in a place where it wouldn't be noticed. He had altered his pants just so, getting the pattern just right so it wouldn't be noticed unless someone was searching him. It was no different than arming to go into public, and as long as nothing looked amiss, then no one would stop you. He had a knife on his left side, a knife in his right waistband, as well as a secret pocket high up on his left inner thigh, where most COs wouldn't search. This was where he kept his important things. He had stolen a key from one of the maintenance guys, a key that would open most of the doors on the dorms, as well as some chemicals to make components that would blind people or choke them up. He had these hidden in that pocket, out of sight, but still close, and he suspected that he might need them to kill inside E-dorm again. "Chow!" said a loud voice overhead, the speaker crackling as the CO called for chow. "Line up for chow if you're eating." B50967 took one last look at his gear before heading out, closing his door behind him. There were more goodies inside the cell, and he really didn't need anyone getting curious and trying to find them. Anything they could turn up in that cell would get him a quick trip to confinement, but he knew that that was temporary. He had a life, multiple lives, so what was 30 days for a weapons charge or 90 days for assault? The worst thing they could do was catch him at his murder, and that would be a quick trip elsewhere. If he were at another facility, transferred for killing an inmate, the deal would be off, and he would be stuck. He had to be quiet, he had to be smart, and he had to be careful. He queued up for chow, the officer letting them into the sally port once they had enough of them to line up, and they piled up near the door like cattle in a chute. B50967 stayed back, however. He didn't like being amidst a crowd. These guys hadn't realized who he was just yet, and the ones who did knew enough to keep their mouths shut. He didn't want to catch a knife in the kidney just because of some long-ago slight back when he was Officer Cribbs. He stayed near the end, keeping his back to the wall as he plastered on a dreamy look that had become his normal expression. "What you say, killer?" said a couple of them, earning a blank look before they wandered off. "Doper," he heard one of them whisper as he moved off, but he ignored it. B50967 didn't let it get to him. Let him think he was a doper. It had helped him kill Peter McCormick. Peter had been with this little group he was trailing, but he had also been fond of selling drugs on the side. Whatever gang he was with, they certainly had access to some substances, and he had set up a meeting with Pete to buy some stuff. It had been easy to mingle with a different dorm and get on the rec yard, easy to find an alley where Pete was selling his wares, and easy to stab him in the throat and push him into the rec yard toilet. He had left most of the blood in the bathroom too, which meant it would take them longer to find the body. The thing about Stragview was, despite the inherent danger of the work, many of the COs were complacent or just downright lazy. They could pass a count all night, only to discover at 3 a.m. that they didn't have as many inmates as they were supposed to, sparking a massive compound-wide count. Most of them wouldn't even notice if he went to another dorm for a few hours, and B50967 knew that. Had he ever been that blind? He didn't think so, but he supposed it was possible. Maybe Officer Cribbs had been blind, been lazy, and that was why he'd been caught. B50967 was not blind, however. He was the hunter, the killer, and he moved as stealthily as any jungle cat. They passed a line of E-dorm inmates on the way to chow, close enough that he could have done the deed right there, but instead, he just marked his target as he shuffled by. It wasn't hard. The little orange shadow behind him marked him for who he was, and the guy was trying his best to shoo the one-eared Tom away. This was him. This was Mackenzie Daniels of E2, Bunk 14 Low, he of the blonde hair and the beard. He didn't make it obvious. He didn't want to tip him off, but he did mark him so that he could find him again when the time came. He went to chow, he ate his chow, and he went back to his room, had the guard open his door for him, and went inside to plan. The best way would be to do it during rec, but how to get him without being noticed? He could find out more about him, wouldn't be that hard, but if he went to one of the loudmouths for information on a guy who turned up dead, then it would look really bad. It was unlikely that he could catch him like he had McCormick. McCormick had been a known user, but Daniels might prove to be clean and less likely to jump at the idea of dope. No, he'd have to figure something out if he was going to get him. But he had time. He had all the time in the world. Turned out it was time that he wouldn't need. At noon, B50967 was called to the pod door by Officer Cambridge. He was a little worried at first, thinking that someone had cottoned to his plans, but he could hardly refuse a verbal order to report. He came timidly from his cell, looking inquisitively at Cambridge as he shuffled close, the look of disgust hard to miss on the man's face. Cambridge had never liked Officer Cribbs, and now that he was inmate B50967, that hatred had been magnified. "Medical call-out. Report to medical for examination." B50967 nodded, keeping his head low as he made to pass. Cambridge, however, wasn't done with him yet, and stepped into his path before he could get through the door. "Makes me sick to see you here. They should have given you the chair. I hope every day before I come in that I'll find out someone slit your throat for you in the night." B50967 didn't say anything. "Get out of my sight," Cambridge said, stepping aside and letting him go. B50967 stepped into the waiting room and realized that Providence had smiled on him. The waiting room was pretty full, the usual collection of hypochondriacs and whiners, but the empty seat just so happened to be next to Daniels. He was just sitting there, acting like he didn't have a price on his head, as calm as any deer in the woods before a hunter blows them away. He could see half of the Jesse tattoo on his right arm peeking from beneath the sleeve, and when B50967 took a seat next to him. His eyes got big. "Hey, aren't you that guy that used to work here?" B50967 stayed quiet, elbows on his knees, as he put on his best shell-shocked look and just stared at the back of the guy's head that sat in front of him. Yeah, it's you! You killed all those girls! Man, I bet you have some stories, don't you?" He kept his eyes forward, not engaging, as his other hand slipped towards the knife in its belt. Hey, it's okay. I don't care that you used to be a guard. I actually killed a girl too, to get here, except it was my sister. Stupid bitch, she tried to cut me out of the will. All she was good for was spreading her legs, and she wants to tell me I'm not getting anything? I didn't stand for that, and neither did you. Man, the other guys are going to flip when they hear I talk to you. B50967 processed what he had been told, forming a counterpoint, and already formulating a plan to get what he wanted. "Sorry," he said raspily. "Most people don't want to talk to me, so I'm kind of out of practice. They usually hate me because I was a guard or because I killed women." Nah, I get it. Sometimes they just need killing. They don't know their place, and yeah, you know?" he said, smacking a fist into his palm. Yeah, B50967 said, looking away. I get it. Sometimes people just need someone to give them what's coming to them." They talked for a while, B50967 mostly just nodding. Daniels seemed more than willing to fill the gaps in the conversation. He had only killed one person, but it seemed he had thought about killing others. His mother, his girlfriend, some people at work, many others. As the room emptied out, slowly but surely, and as it did, B50967 excused himself to go to the bathroom. He came out a few minutes later, the needle carefully tucked between his fingers. This would have to be smooth, but he knew he could manage it. "Daniels, E52369, called the nurse, and as Daniels got up, B50967 stepped past him, saying it was good to meet him. "You too," Daniels said, extending a hand for a shake. "Like I said, my friends won't," but he pulled back, hissing as the needle pierced him. "What's wrong?" B50967 asked, pulling his hand back as the man shook. "Nothing," Daniel said, sucking the spot on his hand. "Must have gotten a static shock or something. Take care, my friend," he said, walking off to the counter as B50967 resumed his seat. He was still sitting there when someone yelled from the back, and another called a medical emergency code overhead. He had already dropped the needle by then, so they wouldn't find anything to link him back to the poisoning. The needle was from a hypo he had managed to get his hands on, and he had loaded it with enough fentanyl to kill a grown man. He wondered what they would make of it when they did a tox screen, and figured Daniels would probably be dead before the response team got there. He had heard of less killing people faster, and he doubted that they would think to use Narcan on him before it was too late. When the guard came to take the rest of them out, saying medical callouts were canceled, B50967 got up placidly and followed them out. 3 down, 9 to go. Are we just going to pretend that something didn't happen to Mac? Marcus made an exasperated sound. He died of a drug overdose. You heard them say. So Mac just, decided to take up fentanyl while he was at a medical call-out? You buy that, Charles? Because it feels a little far-fetched to me. Charles didn't say anything. He'd been pretty quiet since the news had come in, and it was no secret that he and Mac had been tight. They had come in about the same time, and Mac was the one who had brought him into the cult of Jesse. If it hadn't been for Mac, Charles might not have met any of us. He might be thinking better of it, if that was the case now. Mac made the third to die under strange circumstances, and I couldn't believe it was a coincidence. Look, Marcus said, rounding on me but trying to keep his voice low, we still have 3 weeks until Halloween. Regardless of what's going on, We just have to stick together and we'll get through it. He won't kill all of us before it's time to go," Hadrian said cryptically. "He can't get us all before the time comes, and he knows it." He never even looked at us when he said it, just staring off into space like a zombie as he clutched at that little totem. We all exchanged a look. Hadrian, the brains of the operation, our leader and plan maker, was losing it. He barely ate, he never slept, and all he did was listen to the voice of that rock he had, the one he had snatched from the warden's office. It was a little unsettling, watching him mumble to himself, and when he did speak, it was almost worse. When he spoke, it was always to deliver some cryptic prophecy. He had told Mac not to go to his call-out the other day. Come to think of it, we'd been sitting in the day room watching the end of Good Morning America when Officer Haley had come in and told Mac to come on. Hadrian turned as the man got up, clutching his shirt and making the poor guy jump as he held him in place and begged him to stay. "Danger lurks in that place," he had whispered. "If you go, it's certain you will never return." Mac had shrugged it off, telling Hadrian that he'd be fine, but then he had died of a drug overdose right there. Whatever Hadrian had there, it had been right about the things it showed him. "He who?" I asked. "Who is he?" Hadrian looked lost, like he was trying to find something he had lost track of before, finally whispering, "I do not know. I cannot see him, but he sees us." Marcus sighed. "Don't encourage him. We need to stick to the plan. We still need the candle, and it's gonna be the hardest bit to get." "Don't worry," Frank said. "I got it worked out. I know a guy in the kitchen who's sneaking me fat off the pork chops and grease from the meat." "Grease and fat? What good is that gonna do us?" Charles asked. "Fool, don't you know nothing? Candles are made out of tallow, and that's fat. And grease, well, we can supplement for what we can't get. My brother and I used to make candles out of it when we were little, to keep warm when Daddy would drink up the power bill money. Doesn't make heat real well, but it does make light, and that's all we need, I assume." Marcus looked at Hadrian for a moment, hoping he would add some wisdom there, but when he got nothing for his effort, Hadrian told Frank that sounded fine. So long as it lights, it should work. "We need to stay put," Hadrian said suddenly. "If we go out there, we need to go in a group. He can't get us if we're in a group. Safety in numbers. Numbers are best. If we stick together, then we will be safe." He went right on mumbling to himself as we turned back to the TV, trying our best not to notice as he slowly deteriorated. It was a sound plan, however, and we decided to adopt it. Whether it was going to meals, going to rec, or even just moving inside the dorm, we all went in a group. We probably looked a little silly, but no one commented. It seemed like everyone was grouping up these days, and it had a lot to do with the people getting killed. They seemed to have accepted that Mac had been part of that too, and everyone was on high alert as we moved deeper into October. A couple of days passed with nothing of note happening, and when one of the guards came to see us on Friday night, the same one that had got us into the tower, even Hadrian noticed how ragged he was looking. His hair was a mess, his uniform disheveled. His eyes roamed the day room like he expected to be attacked. "I don't have long," he said. "I have found a way to get you guys into the graveyard on Halloween, but it's going to be extremely dangerous, and you have to be ready at 11 o'clock. This is going to be quick. It's going to be dirty, and you may not like what you see while you're doing it." Marcus and I shared a look. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. I can't say, but the route we're taking is through the Bone Way," Hadrian whispered, before breaking into a snickering fit. "He's taking us through the tombs and into the Bone Way." The guard looked at him and seemed to weigh again the benefits of helping us. "What the hell is wrong with him?" "Nothing," Marcus lied. He's just a little stressed out at all the preparation for the raising. He'll be ready when the time comes. Don't you worry. The plan is sound, right?" The guard nodded, rising from the table as he noticed the officer return from break. "I'll be in touch. Stay safe and stay together." "Don't tell me you think something's targeting us too," Marcus said with exasperation. "It's not a coincidence that 3 of you have died. Management may be putting the idea out there that the deaths aren't connected, but it's not hard to see a pattern here." So, that's what we did for the next 4 or 5 days. We left the dorm only as much as we had to. We stayed in a group when we did, and we didn't take needless risks. No one had any call-outs. None of us had a prison job to go to, and we mostly just watched each other's backs. The only oddity seemed to be the attention of the big orange cat that had taken to following Charles around. No one had ever seen the cat become so interested so quickly in so many different inmates, but the fact that he'd been following those who turned up dead wasn't overlooked either. People had started avoiding the cat and stopped feeding it scraps when they left the chow hall. Charles had tried to laugh it off, but I could tell it was worrying him. It had followed Mac the last day before he had turned up dead, and now it was following him too. He was trying his best to keep it together, but the cracks were beginning to show. The second week of October went by mostly without incident, and when Saturday came, we felt relieved to have come 1 week closer to our goal. As we lined up for chow, I noticed we were 1 short, and I turned back to the dorm to see Charles still bundled up under his covers. I took a step towards him, meaning to wake him up, but Frank told me to leave him be. Charles had been stressing over the attention of old One Ear, and if he wanted to sleep, we should let him. I doubt anyone's going to attack him while we're gone, and if he wants to stay inside the secured dorm, behind the locked doors, then that's fine. I didn't want to leave him, but I nodded and went to breakfast with the rest of them. Frank lingered around the food window when it was his turn, drawing a shout from the guard, but when he came to sit down, he was all smiles. "I got the last of the grease. I should be able to finish the candle tonight." "Wonderful," Hadrian said, his food mostly untouched. "After that, we have everything for the ritual. We just have to outlast whoever is killing our group." Marcus started to say something, but Hadrian spoke over him. I know, Marcus, that you do not put a lot of credence into these killings being linked, but someone is targeting us. The guards can see it, so why can't you?" "Because we've been careful," he said, though it sounded lame to me as well. "Because I don't think anyone could guess our motives. How could anyone know to target us? It's just..." He searched for something, but couldn't come up with it, apparently. "And yet they are. The totem has told me things about the warden and the prison that lead me to believe that none of it is too out of the ordinary for this place. The warden likely already knows we took his things, but he cannot find where we have hidden them, so he's forced to act through a proxy. As long as we act smartly, there is nothing he can do to us. We act within their rules to break them. In that way, we are untouchable." I nodded. This sounded like the old Hadrian I'd known, and I was glad to see him return. We came back to the dorm, ready to plan, and Marcus told me to go wake up Charles. He slept in late enough. He could be of help here. I went and shook him, telling him he'd missed breakfast, but it wasn't until he fell out of his bunk that I noticed all the blood. The wool blankets we use had soaked it up, drinking him dry as he died, and I stepped away as he began to leak on the floor. His head lolled on its slashed neck, and his eyes were open and staring. I ran for a guard. It appeared the killer had struck again. No one knows how they're doing it, but someone is sneaking in and out of the dorms at night without being seen. I heard it was a ghost, one of many ghosts that haunt Stragview. A ghost? Boy, you'll believe anything, won't you? Ghosts don't cut people's throat in their sleep. It's probably one of the guards, or one of the ex-guards. B50967 could feel their eyes shift to him, but he kept sitting at the table in the day room playing solitaire. The murder of the week before had been all that they had talked about for the last couple of days, and it was becoming tiresome. Nah, couldn't be him. That dopehead never does anything but sit around and mope. Whatever killed these guys has some flair, some ice in their veins, and whatever sand that one had tumbled out when they caught him. As he played, B50967 planned his next move. Charles Lamorne had been easy to kill, the easiest yet by far. B50967 had observed that his target never left outside without a group, and that he never took any risk or talked too much to anyone. He wouldn't catch him as easily as he had caught Daniels or McCormick. No, this one would take some work. He had taken some risks to get him. He had slithered out the fire door in the dorm, something he knew he could do without getting caught, crept into the dorm while the guard on shift talked on the phone. E-dorm had no trip sensor in the door, but it did make a lot of racket if you weren't careful. While the guard jabbered at someone equally as bored in a different dorm, B50967 had crept amongst the sleepers and found the one he wanted. Lemoyne had opened his eyes as he opened his throat, but he had cut just right, and he hadn't made a sound as he pulled the blanket over the top of him. That had been 4 days ago, but he already had another target, and this one would make number 5. Frank Weiss, E2, 18 low, salt and pepper hair, 6'2", Jesse tattoo on chest. He'd seen the man, and the cat had seen the man, but old One Ear had only been able to tail him for a little while. Hermes was walking with a little limp these days because after the second time the cat had trailed him, the rumor was that Frank had punted the cat across the yard. The guards hadn't done anything, it was just a stray cat after all, but B50967 was sure that this had painted a target on the man's back as far as the warden was concerned. The health of Hermes, however, was secondary when compared to the increased security around Frank Weiss. They had moved in a cluster when he had been tracking Charles, but now they never seemed to go anywhere. The group had been absent from chow, canceling or refusing any call-outs, and hadn't even gone to rec in the last few days. They had likely been living off canteen food, but they couldn't subside like this forever. If they wanted to keep up the standard of living they were used to, they would have to go out, they would have to get supplies, and they would need to conduct business. Now it appeared that B50967 would have to go to them again. The problem was that after 3 murders, the compound was on high alert. Extra hands had been brought in on each shift, and the eyes watching the compound were many. The chances of getting caught would be high, but what else could he do? He had to get his target, and something new had come up as well. Hermes had come to him this morning, walking a little less stiffly, and given him a message that spoke volumes of the warden's intentions. He was getting desperate. B50967 could see it in his words, and this note had been the first to contain a timeline. Something is going on with your targets. They are preparing for something, and my sources tell me it may come to a head on Halloween. I need you to move your timetable up, or the men I need eliminated may move beyond your grasp. Get it done, but be smart, and destroy this after reading. B50967 had flushed it right away. He was no fool. He wouldn't just leave evidence around for someone to find. He hadn't killed so many without being smart about incriminating himself, though not as smart as he had thought, apparently. He picked up his cards and went to his cell as they called for evening chow. There was nothing else for it. He would have to risk it. He stayed in that night, preparing for his job, and when the lights went out, he knew the time would soon be right. He kept watching the clock, waiting for 11:30, but he also kept a watch on the bubble that sat above the quad. There were still 2 officers there, something that hadn't happened in a while, but he knew that pretty soon the sergeant would leave and he would be able to make his move. Once the sergeant left, the officer who stayed would get comfortable and doze off, figuring he didn't have any reason to keep a close eye. All his charges were tucked in tight, and they wouldn't be out till breakfast. 11:40, 11:45, 11:50, 11:55. Midnight came and went, but as the sergeant came down for a round, he saw him head out the front door after finishing the last quad and not return to the station. B50967 looked at the clock. It was only 12:10, and he could make it there and back before the sergeant returned for another round. He glanced at the station and found it empty. The officer had gone to the bathroom, it appeared, and so he keyed the door with the paper jam he had made and made his way out. The quad was full of snoring and light breathing, but he passed unremarked as he went to the back door. The key slid in, and he was out before the man came back from the bathroom. He had 45 minutes on the clock to stick someone and come back before he was missed. Plenty of time. He snuck through the darkened grounds of Stragview, careful to avoid the well-lit areas like the sidewalks or the fronts of dorms. He was familiar with the few cameras that dotted the yard, and he was careful to give them a wide berth. His dorm wasn't terribly far from E-dorm, but it did require him to sneak in front of the fence for J-dorm, the abandoned death house. J had been closed about a year after he had started at the prison, and there had never been any definitive answers as to why. He didn't know where the prison was keeping its death row inmates now, but it certainly wasn't in there. The building loomed behind the fence like a haunted house, and sometimes at night you could see strange lights from behind the windows. Inmate B50967 would freely sneak into almost any dorm, but the death house was where he drew the line. There was nothing in there that he wanted bad enough to risk his life. He was coming around the fence that closed off the rec yard, E-dorm within sight, when the side door suddenly opened. 2 people stepped out. One of them was the sergeant that he had been waiting on to leave before he stepped out, but the other, to his surprise, was the man he'd been hunting this whole time. It was hard to tell in the light, but the build was right, and he had the salt and pepper hair that the description had given him. Inmate B50967 felt like he had been given another lucky break. He wondered if it was Providence or something darker that kept putting these men under his hands. They walked towards the yard, and when the sergeant took out his keys and opened the gate, inmate B50967 pressed himself against the fence. He hoped the shadows that he was in would be deep enough to hide him from the eyes of the 2 men, and as the lock came off and the 2 stepped into the rec yard shed that sat beside the entrance, inmate B50967 was once again very lucky. The sergeant had not locked the gate behind him, and it was easy to slip inside and creep towards the door, the one that separated the yard office from the rest of the yard. The 2 were standing inside the dark shed, the light of the officer's computer illuminating them both in the sickly glow. They were arguing about something, their attention on each other, and it was easy for Hunter to creep up on them. "I got your note. What do you need to talk about? This sort of thing is dangerous. If Clarence hadn't been on tonight, I don't know how I would have justified pulling you out after midnight. I just need to be sure that everything is going according to plan. There's about a week to go, and Hadrian's getting worse. I really need this to go off without a hitch so I can get that totem from him before he goes completely crazy." He eased the door open a little further, wanting to slip in while they fought. "If Hadrian's losing his mind, then why are you still following him? This is dangerous enough as it is. I don't need to be throwing in with some inmate with a screw loose. Hadrian is fine," Frank said, a little defensively. "It's that totem that's making him nuts. He won't let go of it, and it's always whispering to him. He says he needs it for whatever it is that we're doing here, and that scares me even more. Have you heard anything from the warden's people? Do they know what's going on here? A little more, and he'd be able to slip inside. Just a little wider. If they do, they haven't said anything to me. I'm eager to get this over with, though. I don't like this, and I don't want to get tied up in this when the warden figures out what happened. Then do your part and move on. Hadrian has already said you'll be rewarded for your efforts, and you'll just have to... Providence, it seemed, had abandoned inmate B50967. The door creaked on the last few inches, and both of them turned to look at him as he crouched in the doorway. The inmate he'd been talking to shrank back, clearly not wanting to be noticed, but the sergeant became indignant. He didn't reach for his radio, he just balled his fist up and stepped towards inmate B50967. What in the hell are you doing out of bed at this hour and on the rec yard to boot? How did you get here? I got a good mind to... But he stopped talking when the hunter slid his knife into him. He kept on sliding the knife into him until the sergeant went down in a puddle of his own blood. He was twitching and gurgling, and inmate B50967 was pretty sure that he had hit something in the lower intestine. He took out a rag from his pocket and wiped down the handle of the blade. Then he turned to Frank as the man cringed in the corner. Wait, don't, I can help you. We can... But the hunter didn't care. He stuck another knife in Frank, and by the time he was done, he had stabbed both of them about 50 times. It wasn't until he was dragging Frank over by the sergeant, making it look like they had killed each other in a fight, that he realized it wasn't Frank. He didn't know the man, but he was around the same size as Frank and had the same salt and pepper hair that had led to the misidentification. He believed this one might be called Marcus or something like that, but it didn't matter now. He staged the scene, putting the prints on the knives, and then made his way back to the dorm before he was missed. He supposed he had time now. Wasn't like the sergeant was going to come and catch him out of bed, was he? He was back in his bed and sound asleep by the time the alarm had been raised. When Frank or Marcus or whoever couldn't be found at the 3 o'clock count, they had raised an alarm and an emergency count had been called. When the sergeant also couldn't be found for the count, the compound had been checked and rechecked. They didn't find them until damn near dawn, and that raised a new alarm. The going story was that the sergeant, Sergeant Thompson, was the one killing the inmates, and that Marcus had just managed to get the better of him when he tried. It was all over the compound, and B50967 was hoping it might help him go unnoticed. When he came back to his cell after being dragged out of the day room and counted for the half a dozenth time, Hermes was waiting for him. The note under his collar made him sigh in relief. Marcus Green was on my list already, so kudos on the kill. I will even give you credit for Sergeant Thomas, the traitor that walked amongst us. You have 3 to kill next, and something to take into custody for me. I need Frank Weiss, Hadrian Caravel, and Gabriel Smith, all of them from E-Dorm, eliminated before November 1st. Hadrian has an item, a totem made of rock, that you will bring to me as well. Do this, and there will be only one more kill between you and freedom. Do not disappoint me. B50967 flushed the note after reading. He would not disappoint. When Hadrian said that tonight was the night, I think we all breathed a sigh of relief. It had been a long week. None of us had left for anything. No call-outs, no chow, no nothing. It had been like that since Charles died, but it got even worse after Marcus was killed. None of us believed that it was Sergeant Thompson, the guy who had been trying to help us, and an air of distrust seemed to hang around everything now. How much did the warden know? What was he planning to do? How much time did we have before he made his move? We had huddled in the dorm and waited to be found out, but it appeared that whatever he had wasn't as targeted as we had thought it was. We had waited and hoarded our food and slept very little in the week up to Halloween, but it appeared that now all of it would come to a head We would go and summon Jesse, or we would all die in the undertaking. There was no real middle ground to speak of. Officer Clarence has assured us that Sergeant Thomas told him about the plan and how we meant to undertake it. He will remove us when the time is right and take us to the spot that Thompson meant to usher us through. Yeah, about that, Frank put in. How are we going to get over the fence? You said he was taking us to the Bone Way. What is that? Hadrian shook his head. Not over the fence, brother. Under the fence. Under the fence, Frank asked in disbelief. And how would you suggest we do that? We supposed to dig a tunnel in one night? A little faith, brother. We will not be the one digging the tunnel. The tunnel has already been dug. By the warden himself, no less. Then if he dug it, ain't he gonna know that we're in it? Hadrian was getting tired of the questions. Just be ready tonight, and all this will be revealed. After tonight, we will all be free, and we won't have to worry about the warden of Stragview or any of this ever again. You have my word. Frank looked like he wanted to say more, but I put a hand on his shoulder and told him to just trust Hadrian. He hadn't steered us wrong so far, so a little more trust was all we needed. With any luck, by tonight, we would all be free, and this place would be nothing more than a distant memory. B50967 awoke and went into his exercise routine. Today was the day, and he needed to be ready. As he did his push-ups, he thought about how he would have to kill them all tonight. There was no other way, and caught or not, he would have to do it, or he'd be stuck here forever. It had been a week and a half since he had killed Marcus and the sergeant. Since then, the compound had been on high alert. There were patrols on the ground now, dogs in and out throughout the day, and there had been some brief talk about putting men with guns in the warden's tower. The warden had shot this down, saying that he would keep a lookout from his home, but there was still a lot of activity on the yard that would make getting anywhere very difficult. Not to mention, someone had finally realized that all the dead inmates were coming out of E-Dorm, and it had become a big part of the nightly patrols. As he moved on to pull-ups on the side of his rack, he reflected on the last time he had tried to get into E-Dorm. He had made it out of his own dorm easily enough. They weren't watching the high-security dorms as closely as they were the ones with the bunk beds, but he had only made it to J-Dorm before a patrol had nearly caught him. In truth, they would have never seen him, but they would have heard the door when he went in, and he was going to need more time than a few moments to do what needed to be done. Luckily, all the bunks he needed were pretty close together. Unluckily, all the bunks he needed were pretty close together, which would mean that they would hear each other if one of them made too much noise. He had to get them all, too, because if he tried to come back on another night, security would be even tighter. As he did his sit-ups, he cursed the luck that the warden hadn't just given him all the names at once. He could have done 3 or 4 a night and been done with it before the heat came down, but he supposed the warden might have been hoping he would fail. If he failed, then he could just get rid of him, and the people he killed wouldn't be on his head. How many other people were killing for the warden like this? It was hard not to contemplate the death of his new benefactor, but that was a trap too. "No," he whispered as he began squats. "No, I will stay the course. This is my only chance, and I won't ruin it over paranoia." He grabbed his towel, wiping off as he put on a fresh set of blues and moved to the day room. There was a show he wanted to watch. A very important show. He didn't take a seat around the TV, though. Instead, he sat at one of the tables, spreading his cards out to begin a new game of solitaire. He saw the big lug when he walked out of the cell, and placed a 10 on a jack as he side-eyed the festivities. It was well known that holidays were the worst time to be in prison, and Halloween was no exception. Forrester had made it very clear that he wanted to watch a show, The Nightmare Before Christmas, that was coming on around noon. Apparently, he watched it every year with his girl when he was on the outside, and he was going to watch it, no matter what. Forrester also happened to be 400 pounds of muscle for the Aryan Brotherhood, and the collection of men around the TV were decidedly darker than his brothers. They were watching football, because inmates were always looking for some reason to gamble, and Forrester grimaced as he strode towards the collective around the TV, his advance already marked. B50967 picked up his cards and proceeded to his cell. He stood in the doorway, preparing to run it shut before the OC went flying. "Hey," Forrester said, following it up with one of those words B50967's father had been so fond of when he was a kid. "Give me that damn remote." "What did you say to me?" said the fellow with the remote. "You heard me, boy. Give me that remote before I break your face for it." Some of the other Peckerwoods were beginning to hear the call to adventure, and B50967 got ready to secure his door. "Make me, you piece of..." But Forrester made good on his threat, and then the fight was on. By the end, 8 of the 12 combatants went to confinement, and 4 of the others went to the infirmary. The fellow who had been holding the remote actually went to the hospital before it was all wrapped up with a skull fracture, and B50967 watched it all from the little window in his cell. The response was swift, the force brutal, and there were 12 freshly empty beds that night when the lights went out. Good, B50967 thought as he lay on his bunk waiting for the count to end. Less people to see me when the time comes. "Okay, it's time." I shuddered awake as Hadrian whispered in my ear. How the hell had I fallen asleep? Frank was already crouched beside him, and I could tell it was late. The clock on the wall said 5 after 11, so count was likely still going on. That would take the extras off the yard, so now would be the greatest time to move if we didn't want to be caught. Pretty smart, I thought, as I got ready. Hadrian had a homemade shoulder bag with him, and he looked as lucid as I had seen him since the heist. It was like someone had splashed cold water on him, and he was ready to get business done now. That was good, because we had business to do. We all went to the door, not bothering to crouch since the guard was gone, and when Officer Clarence came to open the door on the side of the dorm, he looked pretty scared. Why shouldn't he be? I thought. He was getting ready to walk the razor's edge right along with the rest of us. "Okay, come on. We have to make this quick." We followed him to the rec yard, and as he popped the lock, he was already ushering us through as he snapped it back in place. "Okay," he said, leading us to one of the sheds. "This is the way, but I need you boys to do something for me. As I open it, I need you to make it look like I was coerced. I need you to hit me across the jaw, and when they find me, I'll be passed out, and I can say I was unconscious. All right?" "Hit a guard and get my freedom?" Frank joked. "This night just keeps getting better." Clarence slid the key into the spot in the wall, and as he turned it, the bricks gave way, and we could see there was a staircase rolling down into the ground. "You go to the end of that hall and open the door. Don't stop to talk to anybody, and don't try the keys on any of the doors. And don't linger. The quicker you get this over with, the better. Good luck." We thanked him, and then Frank spun and put him out with a right cross that snapped his head to the side. "Well, at least he won't have to pretend now," Frank said, growling as he took the keys and descended into the darkness. The Bone Way, as Hadrian had called it, turned out to be a prison beneath the prison. There was a low row of cells, each with a little window and a number, and as we went through them, we heard people begin to call out. Some of their voices were low and raspy, others were gurgly and not at all human, and a few spoke languages we didn't know. We didn't linger, but I couldn't help but glance around. There were people down here, people who looked normal enough, but there were others who were deformed or downright alien. We passed a guy with worms coming out of him, a guy with ice for skin, a guy who yelled about rats, and an old guy, I thought, might be asleep in the middle of his cell. We passed them all, stopping for none of them, and when we got to the door at the far end, Hadrian opened it to find a stairway leading up to a hatch. The hatch opened up by a maintenance shed outside the fence, and we felt the air of the free world for the first time in a long time. "Come on, no time for dawdling," Hadrian said. We snuck around the perimeter, dodging the headlights of the chase vehicles as they drove around the prison. It wasn't hard. We really just had to wait until they went to the other side of their route, and soon we were standing beside the little fence that made up the graveyard. There were no inmates in the cemetery. Inmates were buried elsewhere. This graveyard was for the honored dead, staff who died honorably in the line of duty, if their families permitted, were laid to rest here, and since Jessie hadn't been claimed by her family, she had been put here when she died. Hadrian had told us this 100 times, but it was a little different to see it with the light of the Halloween moon overhead. Her grave wasn't hard to find. It was large, ornamental, and stood out in a little field of small headstones. The legend read, Jessica Ridley Sampson, beloved nurse of Stragview. She had died in October of 1975, on Halloween, as it happened. Suddenly, it all made sense. The timing was purposeful. We were going to bring her back on the anniversary of her death. "You boys get the items set up. I'll mark out what needs doing," Hadrian said. And so, we set to work. It hadn't been easy to sneak onto the rec yard this time. B50967 had been waiting for them as they came out, but he knew he would need to take them without killing the guard. The warden likely wouldn't care, but B50967 was also very curious to know what they were up to. He'd been tracking them for a month now, finding out a little here and a little there. He knew they were up to something, and he wanted to know what. He found the gate locked, but not locked well. B50967 had managed to slip through the small opening, and he was glad that he had stayed in shape. Had he put on the weight that most of them do when they come here, he would not have been able to slip in, and as he came through with a jingle of chains, he looked back at the captain's office, expecting someone to challenge him. No one did, and he moved on, unremarked upon. B50967 went into the room, the same one where he had killed the sergeant and Marcus, and found another officer laying on the ground. He bent down to check the man, thinking he might be dead, but he was only unconscious. He thought about killing him for a moment, but decided against it. There was nothing to gain from it, and the warden hadn't greenlit it. He proceeded down into the shadowy opening, something that interested him more than the unconscious body, and found the answer to another Stragview secret. B50967 had found the under-prison, the one people whispered about, and no one quite believed existed. He passed the rows and rows of cells, stopping at one as he heard the scritch-scratch of something being carved into the wall. Looking at it, he could see a young man, now bent and in need of a haircut, as he carved things into the wall of his cell with a piece of stone. The handwriting, at least what B50967 could see, was small and cramped, and he could have likely gone right on carving it for the foreseeable future. There was a little break in some of them, and he thought those might be the end of one thing and the start of another. If the man was aware of him, he never said. He just kept scraping away at his work, never tiring, never slowing. Someone cleared their throat behind him, and B50967 turned to see an old man, though this one had likely been old when he got here. "Leave him to his work. The boy has a fretful nature about him. I sense that you have work of your own to go about. I suggest you do, before you are discovered here." B50967 was suddenly assailed by an overwhelming urge to sit down and take it easy for a while. Was it coming off this man? He didn't know, but He knew he didn't have time to sit here and chinwag. He moved on, finding the hatch still open, and making his way out into the wide world again. Like them, he felt he could have just escaped and moved on, but he knew they would find him. Worse still, he didn't think that he could make it through the woods. He had heard things about those woods, both when he was a CO and when he was an inmate, and the rumors were dark indeed. No one came back from the woods, except that one lucky bastard who sat eternally in confinement. B50967 had no desire to test his mettle out there, and so he turned towards the graveyard and proceeded. He dodged vehicles out on post and made his way towards a lone candle burning in the graveyard. He could hear the chanting before he truly came into the boneyard, and it sounded as if they were getting to whatever they were doing. They were speaking in a strange language, voices raised and moon high, and as B50967 approached, he saw all three of his targets. They had been kind enough to gather for him, easily putting themselves under his knife, and he meant to repay their kindness with a quick death. He slipped up behind the one closest to him, the one with his back to the entrance, and when he slipped the knife into his neck, he gurgled and bled all over the place. The big one, Frank Weiss, E2, 18 low, salt and pepper hair, 6'2", snarled and lunged at him, but the other one didn't even stop. Frank buried him under his bulk as B50967 tossed the other one, Gabriel Smith, aside, and he was raining blows down on him before he was ready. B50967 was no slouch, though. He pulled his arms up the way they had showed him when he was a new officer, and let the lug smash against him for a few moments until he was a little less sure of it. The chanting went on. B50967 could hear it, and as Frank Weiss's blows fell a little less solidly, B50967 struck. He put a knife in his gut, then he took it out and put it in his chest. He missed the heart by inches, but kept stabbing as the big man tried to hit him. When he pushed him off, Frank Weiss was shaking and coughing, but Hadrian Cavill never noticed. He had the rock in his hand, holding it high as it glowed, and as B50967 stalked in, the man went right on babbling. He kept on too as B50967 stabbed him again and again, but as he fell, Hadrian Cavill said something loud and with a note of finality to it, a tone of completion, and when the ground before the grave burst open, B50967 fell back onto his latest kill and panted like a dog. What the hell was this? Was Hadrian some sort of wizard? No, otherwise he would have stopped him. When something began pulling itself out of the grave, B50967 scuttled back like a kid with an open closet door. The hand that came out of the grave had a set of well-manicured red fingernails as it came over the lip. B50967 could see soft hands that had been unmarked by time. The hands were shaking, unsure of what was going on, and when the face of a woman emerged, he saw that she was young and beautiful. She was in her mid-20s, her face mostly untouched by strife, and she looked confused about what she was doing here. She just climbed out of what was presumably her own grave, making B50967 think she might have every right to be confused. "What's going on?" she asked, and when she saw the men that were dead around her, she started to shake and look at him like he might be dangerous. "Please," she begged, I've only just come back. I don't want to die again, at least not tonight." He thought about killing her, the same way he had thought about killing the guard at the entrance to the tunnel. In the end, though, he just took the totem from Hadrian Cavill and went back the way he had come. The warden hadn't told him to kill her, and with one left to go, B50967 wasn't feeling like doing any freebies tonight. He left her in the graveyard making his way back to the dorm as carefully as he could. He closed the door to the underjail. He took the keys from the guard that was still unconscious, and he was back in his room before anyone was the wiser. He'd been gone less than an hour, and as he fell asleep, he wondered how long it would take for the alarms to sound again. Jessie wandered into the Stragview woods after she pulled herself away from the graveyard. Her revival hadn't gone as planned. She seemed to be human again, but the process was supposed to leave her with her spiritual abilities, and she seemed to have nothing but the clothes on her back and a deep sense of dread. When the beasties began to circle her, Jessie felt that her life might be at an end much too soon. When they hit a ring of spectral essence, a small circle of ghostly forms, Jessie thought she might not be as weak as she thought she was. Boys, manners. We have a lady present. The things that had charged her, these shiny black horrors that sprang from the forest, parted as a man in a ratty hoodie and jeans came from their midst. They showed him deference, a level of respect that was rare from these creatures, and as he offered her a hand, she stood up and found him to be normal enough. It seems that you may be more than you appear to be. My name is Reese, Marcus Reese, and I've been waiting for someone like you for a while now. How would you like to help me burn that hateful prison to the ground and see that pompous warden sent back to hell where he belongs? Oh my, Jessie said, his words hitting her like an unexpected pleasure. You know just what a lady wants to hear.